Justin, sir, how are you this evening?
I'm good. The man, how are you?
How's your clock aging? I'm excellent, brother.
Aging slowly. That's a good thing.
Oh, oh, good. Hey, I got a weird view going on again today. Everyone can see my entire room, office here slash studio. Hope that's not too perturbing. Um, Funny enough, I just walked in the door, having been up north in Ontario delivering a lecture on this topic. And it turns out people in the audience were asking all the right questions. It's inevitable, right? Aging. It's not just happening to us. Can't do anything about minutes and seconds going by, but yet a very human contrived notion, right? I mean, we're not going to get ethereal today. We're going to get practical, but the notion of time, and it goes by, and when it goes by, our organs, our cells age. But of course, the question becomes, what if you could slow it down? And that's what we're doing tonight. We're talking about the science of longevity and separating fact from fiction as well. So much hype out there. And I love your position statement on a lot of these things. Very succinct, top line. As a certified functional genomic practitioner at the DNA company, you're all about turning DNA into a blueprint for better aging, instructing folks to be DNA inspired, but also informed by their DNA to do the right things. And you and I have had many conversations about this where the investment of money, time, resources has to go into this. And so to be better informed and understand what's going to work well for you, it's simple. You run your genetics. So we're covering all the latest break. I'm sure we'll have another conversation about NAD precursors, peptides. I know that's your thing. Red light. Who knows? Postbiotics. Anything that makes you live longer, stronger, sharper, and add healthy years to your life. So I suppose we should dive in. How you doing though? Generally, you feeling good?
Yeah, feeling young, feeling vital. And I think a lot of this has to do with how we define aging and what it really is. It's a little bit arbitrary to suggest that the number of trips around the sun that you've made is somehow definitive of how you're aging and how you're doing health wise. I think it's more of a biological concept than it is, to your point, an ethereal concept. And we do have the capacity nowadays to actually measure that rate and how quickly you're aging, because to your point, once again, all of us are aging, right? We have to. Life is chronological in nature, but we do have control over the input, right? We have control over the stimulus and the way that our body is reacting to it. So therefore, if you're aging faster than 1 year per year, well, that's definitely something that we're going to want to target, because that's going to enhance the likelihood of you having premature death or just having suboptimal life in your years as well. So hopefully we can get to
Right.
the bottom of some of those issues.
Well, you know what? Let's maybe start there because I think it's welcome and appropriate to start with the ideas, concepts, the main theories behind aging. Just real quick, maybe punchy summaries. Starting with the DNA damage theory. We're not in the business of DNA for no good reason. It's because it controls aging as well. But the DNA damage theory, and at the DNA company, besides the DNA 360, which we're incredibly proud of, it's our legacy product, looks at your DNA, all of the various silos reports that basically give and shed light on hormones and methylation and your letter vitamins, macronutrients, your executive mood and behavior, and so many other things. It's your instruction manual. Um, Tell us about the DNA damage theory and our DNA aging test. Let's just start there. That main theory of aging.
So the way that your genes are actually methylated in your body play a really big role in how your body controls damage to your DNA, right? Because when your methylation cycle is suboptimal for whatever reason, be it genetic or be it due to improper input, it actually makes it so that the DNA becomes damaged and it can't replicate and repair itself properly. The DNA aging test is really cool because they're actually testing the on and off switches that are happening within your body moment by moment. So as your DNA gets methylated, some of it is being turned on, some of it is being turned off, and you end up with these patterns, right? We call it a methylation pattern. So you can actually look now just with a few blood drops and you can see what genes are being turned on and what genes are being suppressed. Very, very relevant when it comes to aging, because the expression of your genes has a direct connection to how your body is actually aging at a cellular level. And so we have the capacity to test that. And then, of course, we look at your actual genotypes as well to understand that underlying blueprint as well. So the right input makes it so that your body is actually appropriately expressing your genes, and that lends itself to longevity as well as quality of life. So it's a pretty cool thing that we do.
Very cool. And also, just for clarity's sake, remind folks who are joining this evening, the difference between DNA methylation, the act of methylating one's DNA and the damage theory versus the methylation pathways that we look at that are controlled by your variations in DNA.
Yeah, so this is it's a bit of a confusing concept because we're talking about two different things that are married to one another, right? So we actually have a select subset of genes that actually perform the methylation cycle. The methylating is done by enzymes, which are encoded by genes. So that's the methylation cycle. That's the pathway. And we look at your genes for that so that we can understand the different speeds of the enzymes, right? Because we want an efficiency of the cycle. If we can correct the cycle, which we do via targeted supplementation and lifestyle behaviors, then the actual methylating is going to go much better. So methylating is what's going to lead itself to different phenotypes, right? Because
Right.
your body takes all of these epigenetic sensors and it methylates it, and that's when you get the actual cell expression. So there's the genes themselves, and then there's the process that goes on thereafter.
All right. Then we've got the mitochondrial theory, right? And that's your cellular power plants where there is ATP, the currency of energy made, and they wear out over time. And that leads to energy depletion, that leads to organ function decline. We'll talk a little bit, I'm sure, about how to boost their function, help them replicate, help them die off purposely. By the way, this is the most interesting thing about slowing down aging is that we want to actually increase the speed at which dead cells or cells that have loss of function, rogue cells, zombie cells die off. The speed at which you can clear them is going to actually improve the function of new welcome new cells to join the party and do what they're supposed to do. What about the telomere or telomere theory, shortening theory of aging?
Yeah, so telomeres are another concept relative to aging because they're these little caps on the end of chromosomes, right? And as you age, they tend to shorten, and there is a lot of correlation there to telomeres and your actual rate of aging and your body's capacity to age. So we actually look at that, and we look at the DNA methylation estimate of your telomeres as opposed to measuring them themselves. And there's sirtuins involved. There's different things that you can do to support your telomeres as well. I would consider that personally to be one of many, many aspects we look at when it comes to actual aging, but relevant nonetheless. But that's what they are. They're caps on the end of chromosomes, and it's another aspect to the equation, I suppose you could say.
Right. And then a very new buzz term of the day, folks. Many of you have heard of this inflammaging. And that's obviously the idea that inflammation is the backbone. So chronic, low grade, not the stuff that, of course, is as a result of injury, but the chronic simmer of inflammation at the cellular level, which accelerates tissue damage and, of course, ensues disease. And, we'll talk about all kinds of solutions around that. Everything from supplemental omega-3 through to fasting is a great way to manage that and gut health optimization. But then there's also the hormone decline theory. What about that?
Yeah, I mean, menopause, andropause. I think that when you have a reduction in anabolism in the body, then we tend to lead towards more catabolic activity in the body, of course. So we need anti-aging hormones. We need that pulse of growth hormone. We see a lot that when people enter those years, they get a decline in their sleep quality and they get a lot less available growth hormone as well, which tends to have some pro-aging effects when that's suppressed. So I think that also contributes to what you said about inflammation. Like we need to have a good balance between pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory action in the body. And hormonal status, I would say, is one of those added elements to that. It's a contributor.
Absolutely. And we do such a great job understanding the hormone pathways that are controlled genomically. It's all about the pathway, not the individual gene. Then, of course, there's stem cell exhaustion theory. Your body runs out of the repair cells. Maybe we'll get into exosomes, PRP, things like that. And then circadian rhythm, right? That's a big one. If you're a Huberman fan, you're listening to his podcast. He's versed very well in the science of brain and particularly ocular or ophthalmologic medicine. And he talks a lot about the circadian rhythm. So, disrupted sleep cycles, light exposure, dysregulation of the circadian clock. And we also look at those genes and understand what type of person you are, predisposed or not to this, more sensitive or not. To the first morning light and blue blocking, whether that's even something you care to follow. Most of us probably should. And I thought, maybe we take this a little bit organ by organ, but before we do, maybe we'll take a poll and see how people are answering questions here. We've asked some real simple ones. Mine just disappeared. Oh, there it is.
There you go.
Um, yeah, we've got some activity in the background. Thanks always to our support group. You guys are amazing. What you do to put these together. Or Justin and I just have to come on and chat. It's a lot of preparation. Our marketing team, our media team, we thank you. You're awesome. Um, the future of aging, and the first question being, what is your biggest concern about aging? We want to talk to that, and it turns out that it's probably cognitive function. Memory loss, brain fog. 35% of folks are jumping on that bandwagon appropriately. So, I wrote a book, as you know, called Brain Spanners, and it's a twist on the concept of health span, right? So, living healthier longer, that's lifespan. That's what we're talking about tonight. But health span has added healthy years to that lifespan. But then there's brain span. My theory, my postulation, my thesis statement was if you manage your brain the best possible, um, every other organ follows. And I have an argument for that. People are also interested in declining energy and metabolic health, equally almost as much as increased risk of chronic diseases. Physical appearance. Thanks, guys. I'm so happy everyone sort of jumped off that bandwagon. It's not, I think you take charge and you do what you can for all these other aspects, and a couple of wrinkles don't really make a big difference. See what well, maybe we'll get to some trends in a second here. I'm getting ahead of myself, and then I'm not concerned about aging, just optimizing longevity. Beautiful, I love it. 13% are on board with that idea, and a small fraction at 7% of joint issues. We all experience that as we age. What do we have for number two?
Which age group do you belong to? So, trying to get an idea of our demographics tonight. 2% of you are under 30, and a lot of these webinars, it's actually 0%. So, welcome to the newbies. Interestingly, those 0% of you, or at least anyone who answered the poll, is between 30 and 39. So, I'm the only one on this call that's within that age group. 11% between 40 and 49, 20% between 50 and 59, and then a whopping 67% 60 plus. So, we're talking about healthy aging, and definitely let's try to wind back those years, because that question was about chronological, not biological. So I'm hoping that most of you are as young biologically as possible.
Absolutely. And then third, last but not least, have you had any longevity or aging related testing done? That's a multiple choice. So biological age testing, such as epigenetic clock, DNA methylation, 25% of you have. 35% have taken genetic testing for longevity or disease risk. A small 5% full body MRI or AI driven health scans. 31% hormone and metabolic health panels. 24% mitochondrial function or inflammation markers, and about 36% have not, but they're interested in getting tested. Well, you've come to the right place, because we're going to give you some motivation to get tested. And don't forget, again, the idea behind how well you age is informed by your genomics and then bookended, we like to call it, or managed by looking at your DNA aging, our DNA aging panel that Justin, you heard from him talk about the methylation component to that, and some incredible I wouldn't call it artificial intelligence, but there is some of that as well built into this whole notion of putting a biological clock to your chronological age. So my point is get your DNA 360 test. Will give you reasons for that. And then you're going to want to occasionally run your DNA aging test. Why? That's going to motivate you to stick the course, whatever you're doing, and investing time, money, and resources into, so as to see, hey, I was let's call it 42 when I actually did my 360 test, did a DNA aging test. It told me I was 47. Ooh, that's not so good. My methylation's, a little higher than it should. There's some scattered inflammation in my body and my telomeres are shortening, for example. But then you engage in what the DNA 360 testing is suggesting you do, informed by genomics. What are the hormone pathways saying? What is methylation itself saying? What are micronutrients telling you you need more, or in some cases less of? What are the macronutrients? What kind of exercise should you be doing? And all these things. And you test later a methylation test, and lo and behold, you are a 42-year-old in a 47-year-old's body. And now, following that for 3 months, 6 months, you're all of a sudden a 38-year-old in a 42-year-old body. We're changing the day people die. This is, no flighty, unsubstantiated disclaimer. This is something that we're doing. So, I think anti-age. This is just my humble opinion. Anti-aging is trending more than ever because science is exploding. DNA repair, cellular rejuvenation, biohacking. All these things are real, and they're not scientific, or there's not science fiction any longer. But I was going to ask you earlier, Dave Asprey, if you're following his account. We can't not. He's a friend of the company. Have you seen what he's been doing recently?
Yeah, between him and Brian Johnson, there's some real interesting stuff being done, and um, I admire the spirit behind it. I do. As one of my prior health coaching certifications is primal, right? So I really try to dial it back to just starting with the appropriate lifestyle behaviors for our species, like a species appropriate lifestyle. And when you add in more and more and more biohacks, it does get a little bit baffling to witness. However, he wants to live to 180, and I definitely admire the pursuit.
Maybe we'll get there one day. I think between his initiatives and, like you mentioned, a number of other key opinion leaders in the space, and you include the work of David Sinclair and and others, and at the Harvard Anti-Aging Lab, and maybe one day, I think the integration of biology and technology meeting in the middle somewhere there. I think that's probably the winning combination. But I think it's too early to be thinking about living to 180. It's just my personal opinion. 120 for sure. I think we're there. I think most of us, you particularly, you little young gun, I think you're going to probably see a day where you're 120, 130. But we'll see. I think it's also because tech and AI are moving in the direction that we're going to figure out ways in which we can do this faster than the human brain could ever. And I think people are generally, the impetus to desire to want to live longer comes from the fact that they already are, but not healthier. Like, most people are infirmed between. I mean, this is the squaring the curve notion, right? That we want to live longer, but then pass fast. We don't want to slowly and steadily decline. So the notion of anti-aging, or adding healthy years to your life, no matter what that end age is I think where people are coming from. They know they're going to be resuscitated and brought back to life, or maybe surgically triaged in some form of life-saving surgery or medication. But that doesn't mean that they're going to live a good life, till the end of days. So I think that's
Yeah,
another reason why people are getting interested.
I
Um,
agree, and I also think that that's where a lot of biohacking comes from, is that frustration with the traditional healthcare model, which is a sick care model. And when we're talking about drugs and surgery being the predominant options there, and it's not an opt-in model, it's a forced-in model, because at a certain point in your life, your body's not working as well, and then you have to get into that model. The self-care model is opt-in, right? This is preventative, and this is something that we're taking matters into our own hands. And I think that's where the spirit of biohacking really comes in, which is good. I do think that there's some downsides, though, because it, let's be honest, does open the doorway to a certain amount of snake oil salesmanship as well, because people will
sure.
buy the most expensive supplement you sell them if you tell them, hey, this is going to add years to your life, right? So we need to make sure that everything we do is logical, everything that we do is ethical, and everything that we do is science driven, and we're actually testing it along the way.
Yeah.
So it's a good pursuit. It's just that we need to make sure that we're navigating properly.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. aging myths, they're getting debunked fast, right? Science is coming into the front end where we have these early adoption around biohacking, proving it out. Science then catches up, and then we start doing reasonable things, especially when it's informed by your DNA. So I think science is proving that you don't need extreme or super costly interventions either to extend health span. So things like fasting, it's by saving money. Hormesis. I know, you and I like to talk about that. Those things make a huge impact. The bottom line, and our poll just showed it, anti-aging is really no longer about just looking young. No one cares. I mean, they care, but that's a lesser driving force. About staying sharp, strong, and free of dis-ease or chronicity as long as possible. There's all kinds of trends though, and these are ranging from blood plasma transfusions. We're watching and seeing some of the leader voices in the industry bagging up and seeing their blood spin and move back into their system, and over the top supplement stacks. In some instances there's hormone hacking and extreme calorie restriction, which I don't think either of us are fans of. And this allure of longevity influencers. I think we really need to sort of separate science from social media hype as best as we can tonight, and we'll answer all kinds of questions for people that have those. But I don't know. I thought maybe for clarity's sake, it might help to go sort of quickly from organ to organ before taking some of those questions. How these organs age separately and together. Um, but before doing that, maybe even at the cellular level, I mean, you know, we talked about it very briefly a couple of minutes ago. I mean, cells are supposed to die, and the speed at which they die is sometimes healthy and sometimes not healthy. Hayflick, it's an eponym, scientist who researched this notion or concept. The average human cell turns over about 52 times before it's instructed to die. And that's apoptosis, the technical term. And when it dies no silent way. It blows up and releases all its contents and gets, all these different things get recycled. And there's different averages for different cells, but on average, 52 cell cycles. Too prematurely, you don't want that. Cells that are too young, when they die too young and too early, that can be problematic because you start to lose function. It's a lot of energy to make new cells. There's kind of this Goldilocks scenario. Too long, of course, what's that doing when you
That
get
would
too many?
be, yeah, like a senescent cell, right? Those types of cells, they they're done for, but they can't replicate, nor do they die. And when that happens, they'll release all these inflammatory compounds into the body, right? So that's where you actually want to encourage apoptosis. You want the death of senescent cells. And that's why people, getting into the hacks would use things like senolytics to kind of encourage that and speed that process up. We want autophagy, right? So that's where people will use all kind of stuff. Fasting would be the natural way to go about it, but people will use rapamycin, people will use metformin. I'm always of the opinion that we should start with the natural process of it. You know what I mean? We should try to just activate AMPK pathways with things like fasting and not go right to the senolytics and the metformins of the world. I'm not against them, but I do think that there can be some downsides there, and we should attempt the natural route first. Do you have a differing opinion on that?
No, not at all. I think people are starting to, see some of the side effects of that approach when they're just eating everything and anything they want and taking a GLP agonist to sort of cut the excess. And yeah, they're going to end up losing that battle long term. So, no, I don't have any difference of opinion. And I think people are just inherently designed in a way that's probably genetic by nature to want the easy, lazy way out. There's no getting around that. Some of us are different. We're built different. That's the variation within DNA. But generally, we want the easy way out. We want a pill to fix the ill. When it comes to brain, though, the brain ages a little differently than the heart, and that ages differently than the gut. And part of that's due to how fast these cells turn over in these different areas. I was going to say, though, beyond just senescent cells, dysfunctional cells, when they live too long, it really literally is the big C. We are talking cancer here. Cells don't die and or become rogue, and the immune system, they evade the immune system. And that's way oversimplified. That's not all cancer, but it's one of the ways cancers could start in the body. But with the brain, um, when we talked about inflammaging, neuroinflammation's a medical buzz term of the day for a really good reason. There's fire, in our heads, and that's so many different reasons. Leaky gut is leaky brain. Probably toxicologic exposures and various way. We're not sleeping enough. Circadian rhythm. This is all aging us when we do this sort of compound approach to ignoring our brain. And another big one is mitochondrial dysfunction, right?
Yeah.
And all these things lead to neurotransmitter imbalance and glymphatic system decline, right? So the brain has a system by which it detoxifies all of our body. Some of us do it better than others, dictated by our genes. But we don't have lymph in our brain. We have glial cells. And those glial cells are non thinking cells, but they come and sweep up the mess after a day of eating and breathing and living. That's what happens. We all make toxins. And if we don't clear those toxins effectively by sleeping, because the only time your lymphatic system is going to be active is when you're sleeping, then your brain is aging faster. So that's one example. What others can you come up with and think of that our DNA 360 testing is informing to help one go one way or the other as it relates to brain aging?
Man, I really think brain-derived neurotrophic factor is a big deal when it comes to just the quality of your cognition, but also the health of your brain, right? Like there's a reason why we refer to that gene as the concussion gene as well. Because if you were to take a really bad knock to the head and you have borderline suboptimal BDNF production, it's harder for the brain to actually repair itself, right? That's part of its restorative mechanism. So BDNF matters a lot there. I also think that everything mitochondrial related is of relevance because your brain has an incredible density of mitochondria just due to the energy requirements of neurons, right? Like it takes a lot of energy to power that brain, a lot of ATP to power that brain. So anything that's good for your mitochondria is going to be good for your brain. And anything that's good for BDNF is going to be good for your brain. So I do all kinds of stuff to help my brain function, everything ranging from like peptides, like dihexa and P21, N-acetyl C-max, to things like the Brain Tap device, binaural beats, ketones. It just goes on and on because I think that the health of your brain really has a direct connection to the quality of your life as you age, right? That's a really scary thing, cognitive decline. So anything that boosts those factors up, I think is a really relevant thing to do. I'm sure you got some biohacks as well.
Well, I love that you started with BDNF and that we investigate that in a very meaningful way, and that it's not a standalone gene either. There's all the executive mood and behavior genes. If you're more predisposed towards stress, the reason why cortisol's trending these days and in a massive way is because we know how impactful stress can be to all systems and organs, but particularly the brain. The brain controls everything else in the body. And when stress is too high and cortisol is amplified, the downstream negative effect, primary, is accelerated aging. Bottom line, everything just doesn't do well. But I think, and you mentioned, ketogenic cycling, for example, ApoE risk mitigation. Um, you carry a four variant, even a single variant, 3-4 or 4-4, you got to do some serious work. And we all have variations in our genes that suggest one way or the other there's an Achilles heel. But those with a 3-4 or 4-4, especially paired with, suboptimal BDNF and perhaps, you know, in that combination, a comped gene that wouldn't necessarily be optimal, such as one that's very slow and stress is impactful to you. Listen, your brain isn't necessarily in the best of positions. However, the good news is you can do a lot of things for this. And to the biohack question, I guess you're postulating, I would say that's where NAD restoration does come into play. Mitochondrial support. I love ubiquinol. I love PQQ. This is why it's in our black label formulas. I love the idea of anything, including, by the way, and we've spoken about this many times, cheap, inexpensive, but effective ways to upregulate NAD. We don't have to go to NR necessarily or NMN, and depending on who you talk to. Charles Brenner or David Sinclair. It's going to be one or the other, but they're both expensive. I'm a true believer that you can use riboside, D-ribose rather, and nicotinamide or B3 niacinamide, a
Niacinamide.
flush-free format. Use those two together, and you're doing a good job of upregulating NAD. So powerful for the brain. And all kinds of other systems, but the mitochondria is concentrated in the brain and in the heart, and so one of the things we have to do is to upregulate our mitochondria. And if we do that, we're probably going to be living a longer, but more importantly, a healthier life.
Yeah, well, and it's also important to note here that the one between your ears is not the only brain in your body, right? There's actually three. There's the one between your ears, and then there's your gut brain, and then your heart, you could argue, is also a brain and
Yeah.
totally connected to your nervous system. That's why we talk about things like HRV, heart coherent breathing. But another interesting note there, as far as the cortisol dominance that you referenced, when you're cortisol dominant and you're really just, you have that nervous system imbalance, one of the things that it does is it suppresses something called SIG-A, secretory IgA, which is an immunoglobulin that serves as one of your gut's primary defenders, right? So if we're keeping with the analogy that the gut is a brain and really looking at it that way, too much cortisol dominance gets rid of the main thing that's actually defending it. So pathogenic species have a lot more opportunity to work their way in, cause dysbiosis, and now you've compromised that brain as well,
Yeah.
right? So I really think that when it comes to healthy aging, I always bring it back to nervous system regulation.
Absolutely. And zonulin, that's another easy at-home test to run. That's a protein marker, similar to what you're describing. But leaky gut, leaky brain, folks. The blood-brain barrier is structured very similarly to the villi or microvilli, where cells are standing kind of like soldiers, if we were using a human analogy, side by side, interlocking arms. And when those guys go to sleep, get tired, stop, interlocking arms, stuff gets by that shouldn't get by. When it's happening in the gut, it's happening in the brain. And that's part of the theory around entanglement and, inflammation in the brain. How about the heart? And we study this as well. There's endothelial dysfunction specific to the cardiovascular system, not just the heart. So artery linings, one of the genes we look at various loci throughout the human genome, is the 9p21 genes subfamily, which looks at, we kind of affectionately refer to whether you have a Teflon coated arterial system or one that's a cast iron skillet, which I love cooking my ribeye steak on. High heat, no fat added. But it sticks, and I gotta scrub it off after. So everything sticks. So or somewhere in between. But the 9p21 gene, along with some others, ApoE, even what your body does with ApoA2, a bunch of genes, nitric oxide. We look at all these different things to determine what generally is your predisposition to an aging heart. So inflammation, oxidative stress, and your genetic predisposition when it comes to NOS, 9p21, ApoE, and the impact on heart aging. So I think, there's just no question. 50% of heart attacks are silent. They're hard to prepare for. Lipid panels are outdated. I don't care how much you're going down the rabbit hole on particle matter and oxidized LDL, and I think those are important. But the only way to know is to look inside. Literally, do a contrast scan of sorts. But short of that, to no risk is to do your DNA. And then, of course, what are we doing about slowing down the aging effect, inflammation, damage to the arterial lining? Because this age old notion of cholesterol being the problem, it contributes. Centenarians have high cholesterol. People that live beyond 100 in pockets of the world defined by blue zones have high cholesterol on average. It's not what kills them. It's the inflammation that damages the endothelial lining that warrants the deposition of cholesterol in the first place that we have to care about. So I'll flip this back over to you. Once we know we have, let's say, predisposed genes that accelerate aging in our cardiovascular system, what are we to do?
Yeah, so that's where I always zoom out a little bit and try to identify sources of inflammation and sources of toxicity within the entirety of the DNA 360. it's important to note that we always look at these things in terms of systems, right? So, like, I'll use myself as an example. I have good and bad in my cardiovascular report, right? So for the 9p21 locus that you referenced, I'm actually a 0G, which puts me at the top 10% of the population. My endothelium are made out of the cast iron. They're absolutely strong. However, I do have the 3-4 variant in ApoE. So I've got an upside, I've got a downside, and I need to target my intervention toward downgrading the downside. So that means that I have to identify sources of inflammation. Well, how am I going to do that? When I look at the remainder of my genes in the DNA 360, I have 0 copies of GSTM1, which means that there's a greater likelihood of gut dysbiosis and therefore gut inflammation. So I need to put an intervention there. I have a suboptimal SOD2 pathway, which means that my mitochondria are more likely to gum up with oxidative species, right? Free radicals. So that can be a source of inflammation. I have hormone dominance and a little bit of a steered pathway towards 4-hydroxyestrogen. Boom, additional inflammation, right? So it's about putting the little pieces in, and this is where there's connective tissue. I'm not talking about the heart right now. I'm talking about all the things that cause inflammation, because inflammation cause that ApoE3-4 to be more problematic, right? So to me, this is holistic. This is just looking at the entire body and how it really all works together as one.
Love it. I'm also going to ask you to summarize methylation as it pertains to cardiovascular health in a second, because you do a great job of that. Top line, because people have heard it before, and it's not the focus tonight, but it's important to re-summarize. But I just wanted to ask you before you did that, what are you familiar with Dr. Roland McCready? Out of Heart Math Institute. Because these guys are doing some incredible work on heart rate variability. And I'm talking about this because you mentioned HRV a second ago. And I wanted to point out that you're bang on when you say, nervous system decline is one of the most important things to mitigate for aging across the board. And it's all interconnected. Brain controls it, most of it. You've got the peripheral, you've got the gut brain connection, but the heart brain connection, there are more signals that are sent from your heart to your brain, bundle nerves, branches, and so forth, than there is from your brain to your heart. And this loops back a little bit to the idea of stress. So heart rate variability is a very important metric because it'll tell us what our body is doing and how quickly we can move from sympathetic fight or flight stress, which is fine in small amounts, to parasympathetic rest and digest. And we got to, as human beings, stay more in parasympathetic state as often as possible, as deeply as possible, in order to age the slowest possible. So Roland McCready and the folks at HeartMath do a wonderful job of measuring this, and you can do it on your phone for free. But their little technologies just show you and train you on how to move from sympathetic to parasympathetic by looking at and studying your heart rate variability. So I just wanted to point that out. But methylation, why is that important into the concept of aging and cardiovascular disease?
Methylation is important because it's one of the primary regulators of inflammation in the body, right? It helps with your immune system and it helps with your body's capacity to deal with inflammation. There's certain genes that are pro-inflammatory and there's certain genes that are anti-inflammatory. If you're a hypomethylator or a hypermethylator, and we can see that within your genes, that can lend itself to downstream inflammation, right? So it's definitely got some direct connective tissue. I mean, everything in your body has to be methylated, whether it's a gene, whether it's a neuron, whether it's a hormone, all these things need to be methylated. So knowing that pathway, and then again, testing the actual epigenetic expression via something like DNAging, that's how we know how well your body is moderating things like inflammation. The DNAging test has these proxies that they use. They call it EBPs, an epigenetic biomarker proxy. And it's actually the DNA methylation estimate of traditional plasma-based biomarkers like C-reactor protein, fasting glucose, but they're actually more actionable and predictive than taking the actual CRP itself. So it's a really interesting way to go about it. Knowing all of that is going to help a lot with your cardiovascular health, right? And having new interventions being placed in there to establish new methylation patterns that are beneficial and anti-inflammatory goes a long way for your longevity.
Absolutely. Folks, if there's somebody in your life that you love, including yourself, this is how easy it is. If the folks in our control room can actually just give me access to share my screen for a moment, um, I'd like to show everybody how you're a click away from adding years to your life and the years to the life of the loved ones in your life. And as Justin's describing, methylation and testing methylation is the biomarker. It is the test to understand how fast we are all aging. And then that allows us to have some degree of excitement, compliance. Somebody just could give me access to be able to share my screen. That would be great. But around what we do gets us focused for what interventions we need to consider, and also, um, the resources, financial, physical, and time that we might put into it. I'll wait till we get some access there. For some reason, I'm not able to share my screen, but we'll come back to it in a second. And then there's the lungs, uh, lung aging, respiratory function. Um, and I'm not just talking obviously about having the lungs of a marathon runner versus an asthmatic, but elasticity. You mentioned a few minutes ago connective tissue as it pertains to the cardiovascular system, the ability for things to be malleable and working and allow blood flow to go through in a big way. And by the way, are you a fan of those? What the heck are they called? Like you put these bands around the muscles. The heck is that called again?
Oh yeah, that's
Restrictive banding.
yeah, restrict blood flow restriction training, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. As an anti-aging technique, is that something you're a fan about? Just I'm asking out of the blue as a side note because it it came up in my head earlier on today when I was talking about anti-aging.
Yeah, it's certainly effective. The problem is that, if you use these different tourniquet systems and stuff, you need to make sure that you're using the correct amount of pressure. Not enough is going to make it totally ineffective, and too much is going to actually choke off the blood flow.
Right.
So it needs to be a certain amount of pressure, but not too much or too little, and you will get a ton of benefit out of it. I do think that the research is there on
Yeah,
that.
you like it? Okay. I've never tried it. There's something about, I don't know, cutting off circulation to my muscle bellies or bulk of my muscle. I'm trying to actually, I get it, but I've just never done it. So the lungs and elasticity and connective tissue, the lungs, when a lung deflates, it turns into almost nothing. So these big sacs, and they're exposed to what? Oxygen and humidity all the time. If oxidative stress is rust to a piece of metal, there's no place in the body. Well, the heart is probably arguably one of them, but in the cardiovascular, but like the lungs, where air and water mix to be incredibly stressful. Thunderstorms of events toward pro-oxidation happen in the lungs. So there's loss of elasticity, reduction of lung capacity and oxygen exchange, mitochondrial aging that happens there. So you impact ATP production in the lungs, and there's respiratory muscles there as well, and all kinds of things. Inflammation from pollution damage, which increases oxidative stress. So we don't want to forget the lungs, and again, one of the ways we actually consider looking at the lungs is the SOD2 gene for oxidative or antioxidant support, NOS, and nitric oxide. The ways in which genes work, methylation, to give insights, detoxification, glutathionization, into how your lungs may or may not age expeditiously. Um, and then there's all kinds of really interesting anti aging techniques that can enhance oxygen exchange that we think are slowing down aging over time that may not be prohibitively expensive for most people. One of them I've done myself. I did it for 2 months in the recovery of my massive back surgery that I had back in 2020. And that's HBOT, or hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I think there's good research to show that we're actually maybe, it's not the best way to test for aging, the telomeres. You and I both agree it's methylation. But it looks like it may increase telomere length. And then there's also spirometry, but there's even more importantly VO2 max, and even algorithms like on your smartwatch that when you, in fact, I don't know, I'm going to make this statement. muscle is really the best, depiction of what we call the organ of longevity, right? We want to stave off aging in the brain, the heart, the lungs, but by retaining muscle mass is probably going to contribute to the health of all of those things. Everything's intertwined. Uh, but establishing optimal VO, if there was one measure, I'm going to argue by establishing best fitness through tracking VO2 max. There's probably nothing more important to predict your longevity. Am I right or wrong for saying that?
No, I'd say that's accurate, and I do think that if you were to pair that with HRV, to understand that, the heart, the goal isn't to have a heart that goes do 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 do. The goal is to have one that has high stroke volume. So every time that it beats, you get a lot of blood per beat. That makes a really efficient heart. I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea that there's like X amount of heartbeats that you have in your lifetime and then it just cuts off. Some people I've heard say that, but yeah, I think VO2 max is an amazing indicator of your actual fitness level because it's really direct, right? Like how far can you go, in one shot? That's really what VO2 max is. And with the lungs, I mean, obviously, the more efficient that your lungs are, the better your VO2 max is. And I got to tell you, there's a couple things working against us modern day as far as like toxins in the air. Um, like they actually they tested snow on the top of Mount Everest. I don't know if you ever heard about this thing that they did, and there was heavy metals in the snow in the highest peak of the world. So you can imagine how many are there within a city, in some subdivision in a city, and we're breathing these things in. And to your point, those alveoli, those little sacs, can get gummed up with toxins, right? And that's where the exchange happens between oxygen and carbon dioxide. So lung health is really important, and I'm a big fan of certain things like cordyceps mushrooms. I think that's a great little ingredient that you can put in your coffee or something. You can even nebulize certain things, like you can nebulize glutathione, you can nebulize exosomes and things that really help clear the lungs out.
Yeah.
And then just breath work, which I never shut up about with my patients. I always get my patients doing breath work to expand that capacity in the first place.
And in the beginning, it can be a little uncomfortable, but you get better at it over time. I agree. Oral health. We're starting to. We'll get to some questions that are coming in. Please continue to ask them in the Q&A section, folks, so we can get to all of them. Top of the hour is when we'll start. But the oral health connection and aging. That's a surprising longevity link there. By the way, leaky gut is leaky brain. Leaky gut is also leaky heart, right? And I don't just mean valvular leakage from bacteria translocating. I'm talking about actual inflammation to the cardiovascular system. But there's also this other two-way street, leaky mouth. This is a thing. Gingivitis, periodontitis, all caused by P. gingivalis, Streptococcus mutans. These things we know cause or contribute to cavity formation, oral pH variations. In acidic states, you're demineralizing, and in alkaline states, you're remineralizing. I'm talking about oral salivary with the right minerals, by the way, which is often informed and helpful through the DNA 360 test to understand what minerals and micronutrients you should be focused on. Point though is, when there is anything itis in your mouth, there's translocation or the movement unselectively of bacteria into the bloodstream. You want to add years on your life? Here's a really inexpensive, easy to do in 3.5 minute technique. How about brushing and flossing your teeth twice a day? I have a family of 9 dentists. Three, technically six are in practice. I mean, this is immediate family members. Three are about to graduate. One's in Florida. One's in not the UK, but in Ireland, Dublin, and then the other one's in proudly University of Toronto. They're all little genius kids about to become dentists. Anyway, we imagine Thanksgiving at my place. I mean, it's endodontics, this and restorative that, and anyway, it's way too much about teeth. So I just by default know a lot about teeth and oral healthcare. But the point I'm trying to make is 90 to 120 seconds of proper brushing. I won't demonstrate that right now. And flossing for 90 seconds twice a day. You're probably putting 3 or 4 years on your life. Here's a stat I happen to know. Centenarians, people that live beyond 100 in different pockets around the world that do different things but end up living longest, have great oral health. And by the way, they're not using maybe the latest technologies and, jet, whatever, biohacker water sprays and all this stuff. But they do have a great oral microbiome, and they do typically retain 10 to 15% more teeth into their hundreds than their of same cohort 65 to 75 year olds. Okay. So go figure. Anyway, leaky mouth contributes to bad stuff going on in the gut too. And leaky mouth is leaky brain, leaky mouth is leaky heart. So these bacteria are to blame. They move, immune system goes haywire, inflammation goes up, these organs age faster, right? And there's some stuff that we can consider. I mean, I don't know, it's biohacker-ish, but there's salt rinses above and beyond. I wouldn't recommend alcohol-based rinses because that kind of it disrupts the oral microbiome. Hydrogen peroxide oral rinses, do your due diligence to know how to do these things. What are your thoughts though on red light therapy for skin health, gum health? People are using this all over the place for mitochondrial upregulation, right? But
Yeah.
but what about I don't know, these devices that you stick in your mouth with red light?
I think that there's some logic to it, right? Because there's so blue light, which oftentimes gets spoken of in a negative light, but blue light can actually help to whiten your teeth. And then red light really does have that effect on the microbiome of the mouth. There's even infrared toothbrushes out there nowadays. And you want to talk about biohacking, like they put red light in hairbrushes, they put red light in absolutely everything now. But I think that it makes sense that your mouth is a microbiome and it would respond to light because mitochondria respond to light. Mitochondria are bacteria, right? So I'm really a big fan of treating the mouth exactly like a microbiome because that's what it is. And it also represents the first stage of digestion as well. Your saliva has enzymes in there, it changes the pH of your food. Chewing is really important to kind of get the gastric juices flowing and prepare it for the actual digestion of the food. Myself, I actually divert to Ayurvedic wisdom as well. I do the tongue scraping with the big copper tongue scraper. And then I do coconut oil pulling and I add in these different essential oils that are, peppermint and oregano. And I try not to overdo it with the antibacterial essential oils because it can be a little bit much. But every few days, I'll add in some rosemary or something to it as well. And it's just a natural way without wiping out the entirety of the microbiome. So yeah, take care of your mouth, man. It's really important. Good quality floss,
It's
good for your heart, everything.
It's a surprising longevity link, garnering a little more attention these days, but a lot less than it deserves. And of course, the 360 looks at the fucal transferase gene, right? The FUT2, which has huge microbiome influence. So, mouth microbiome testing is built into that. And the whole notion around prebiotics and probiotics and postbiotics again, where are you spending your money? Your area, your focus, your time, your resources, et cetera. I just want to, a couple of call outs. I'm going to share my screen here. First call out is, we have an incredible summit happening right now. And it's the She Summits. It's a masterclass in you, currently bone deep. You want to register for that. Any women in your life, loved ones, please share. We also have a new app you can download at the App Store. It's free. And if you have your DNA 360 or even your 23andMe, because you don't have your DNA, you can upload these things and get partial information from a DNA 23andMe or an Ancestry. But you get, tremendous amount of information if you have your 360 and you walk around with this user guide on you, and it's just phenomenal. So download the DNA app. It's free. Tell a friend. It's key. Testing. I'm going to bring you over to the testing. This is at thednacompany.com. You click on testing. This is one thing we're talking about here: DNA aging, epigenetic tests, and reports. So you've got your 360. That's your base, and you go over here, and what this test is going to give you is biological versus chronological age. Um, I think, and I mean, this is just sort of very back of the napkin cowboy math. I think if you consider investing $400 and at the end of the day, let's rough that out to a dollar and a couple of pennies invested a day to understand the speed at which you're aging, to be able to do things about it and then see that change. That's maybe an $800 investment into proof that what you're doing is taking years onto your life. You're changing the day you die. um, you're probably investing a couple of dollars a day, and getting weeks in return. That's the logic I use, and it's at your fingertips. This is a test that everyone has access to. So tell a friend, and get started. If you don't have your 360 yet, get that done, and then move over to your DNA aging test. I hope that helps. Before we start answering questions, real quick, I want to talk about aging of the eye. No, universally, worldwide, the number one issue with the eye is blindness due to vitamin A deficiency, particularly provitamin A, right? And the body doesn't convert vitamin A from beta carotene. So you can eat as much squash or pumpkin or any varietal orange vegetables you want. If your BCMO gene, which we test for, among others, is of a suboptimal variety, you can't thrive as a vegetarian or vegan unless you supplement with provitamin A and or start eating meat. That's it. I just want to make that statement, and not just vision and eye health. I mean, I think vitamin A, mark my words, is going to be the new vitamin D in about 5 to 10 years. I don't know why it hasn't become more popularized, but you don't want to start taking it. It's a fat soluble, taking large amounts of it because not everyone needs to, and it stores up in the liver and the fat tissue. But macular degeneration, cataracts, retinal mitochondrial dysfunction, all these things that happen in the back of the eye and even in the front of the eye, accelerated aging, can be slowed down when you know what to do about this. And I think that's just sort of another thing we don't think about. I mean, wearing glasses is one thing. It doesn't matter. That happens inevitably to most of us. That's shape and change that happens. The retina, the macula, the areas of focus where light goes in and hits the back there, that is what you want to protect against UV radiation, oxidation, and environmental stressors, largely that has influenced by the cardiovascular system. But people are, this is circadian rhythm and maybe, red light therapy and things like that. But any ocular biohacks that come to mind that slow down the aging of the eye that you know about?
Yeah, one of the more simple ones is that we're not really meant to have something really close to our face for hours out of the day the way that we do, right? Like our ancestors really wouldn't have done a heck of a lot of that, nowhere near to the extent that we do, right? Between
True.
laptops and phones and books. And it's actually the distance. And then that's combined with the fact that there's LED lights, which have this imperceptible flicker in behind it, right? So there's a couple of things going on there. And one of the things that you can do to help restore your ocular function is actually to zoom way out and gaze at the horizon, look further away, right? So if there's mountains or something that you can look at on purpose, spend time looking at things that are far away because it's going to adjust your vision. It can actually help support that. Definitely adding in retinol sources is a very good idea. Personally, I supplement with beef liver, and that's a really good concentrated dose of retinol. So that's great. There's also something called the Z Health Vision Gym. And they use these convergent and divergent exercises. You can find them on YouTube, and it actually is like a little gym for your eyes, like little workouts that you can do to actually increase blood flow into the eyes. So that's great. Beyond that, if you need to get really biohacky about it, then there's things like visomycin, visolutin. These are these mitochondria targeting substrates that you can actually use to improve vision. So look that up if you're really compromised there. I've never used that because I don't have vision problems, but that's one that's pretty highly touted as well. Cannabis, I mean, there's a few things that dilate the capillaries that feed your eyes. That's not a recommendation I'm making, though. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I hear you. I love what you started with, though. So I'm going to reiterate it real quick, and it's known as the 20-20-20 rule. And so every 20 minutes, look up from your device, your computer, stare somewhere about 20 feet away for 20 seconds. And that does help with accommodation, like you're describing, pupillary refraction, dilatation, and this whole, just by looking somewhere distant, focal exercise. So I love that. People should be aware of that. Every 20 minutes for 20 seconds, something 20 feet away. Okay, so let's get to questions, man. Hilda's asking, Oh, you know what, Hilda? So I'll answer this quick. She's asking about the COVID vaccines and whether or not they change DNA in people. I mean, I'm gonna stick to the question, be very simple with the answer because I don't want to stick on this topic really long at all. Vaccines, mRNA, messenger RNA. That's what they were using in essence to instruct your cells to produce spike protein. And that triggers an immune response. That happens whether it's a vaccine or the actual infection. There's a whole bunch of debate. I just don't want to open that can of worms. I'm just going to stop there. So, Mary's asking, can you please give a very simplified explanation of methylation? You want to, again, just everything you, I like to use that relay race notion. It helps people drive it home sometimes. You know, how do we use that?
Yeah, first of all, shout out to Mary. I had the pleasure of meeting you, and I'm sure we'll be meeting again. But yeah, so the genes involved in the methylation pathway, it operates like a relay race, right? So that's why we say that just looking at your MTHFR and seeing if it's optimal or suboptimal is not enough info to understand the actual efficacy of the cycle, right? So you have actually several different genes involved, and each gene operates like a runner in a relay race. And the baton that is being passed from runner to runner is the methyl group or the substrate. And every gene takes it, changes it around, passes it to the next guy. And then ultimately, the goal is to get past the finish line. And that finish line represents the availability of neurons and hormones and neurotransmitters, different things that your body methylates. So it's basically the efficiency of an entire cycle. It's a baseline biological process that our body uses to make things available,
Right.
including genes. So that's kind of the simplest way to put it. We've done several webinars really diving into that as well. I think you and I have done at least a couple, and we did some with Dr. Sapp. And so I recommend it's almost a series at this point. Maybe go back and have a look at those because we went super duper deep on methylation.
Sure. And this is where you get the DNA app. So not only is the DNA app used for free on your smartphone, your app store for your iPhone or for your Android are available in both. You can track and follow what we're doing, webinars and podcasts and series, summits, all that stuff. Join in, search for and re-listen to previous episodes. Very rich platform of information. And of course, walk around with your DNA report. If you haven't already got the 360 and you happen to have an ancestry or a 23andMe, you're only getting a partial because we do it better. But at least you'll have some information in which to be informed. Walking around into a health food store, into a grocery store, like what do I need to do, buy, and invest my time and resources for? That's the DNA Way app. Margaret's asking, have you heard of urolithin A and all the claims? Yeah, we both have. It's interesting. We were talking about the gut bacteria, oral bacteria. There's bacteria everywhere in your nose and your eyes and your ears, and but the stuff that's in your gut produce this compound, and usually through various acids, polyphenols, particularly those. Then this is where the research comes in, and some of the commercially available products out there. But foods that have high amounts like pomegranates, berries, certain nuts, and in fact, actually, the skin of a lot of nuts. I'm a huge fan of Brazil nuts. That's for two reasons. Their skin contains some pretty cool ingredients that I think one day will become a supplement. But their meat, nut, has such a high amount of selenium. I often recommend, I mean, if you can get this, organic, non-irradiated, clean, non-molded Brazil nuts, you should probably take that over a selenium supplement any day. 3, 4 of them is 200 mics, and that's all you need. But health claims, right? So, look, enhanced muscle endurance through mitochondrial upregulation, even cartilage protection, anti-inflammatory protection, brain health, but microbiome diversity. These are all. This is produced, but also shown to be. Studies have shown that only about 40% actually produce a detectable amount of urolithin A naturally. So most of us, we can't consume pomegranate and be able to produce it. So direct supplementation is what I'm getting at, can overcome that variability, ensuring that you're actually getting a therapeutic dose. So that's exactly why some of us, given the nature of our genetic variations, can't eat ourselves into a therapeutic response from that particular food. So you got to supplement. Just no way around it. Um, what did I miss about urolithin A?
So it's what's called a postbiotic, right? So it's exactly what Dr. Wild says. It gets created in there after the fact. So it doesn't matter, like you don't eat your lecithin A, you eat something else, and it triggers the creation of it within your gut. I'm actually on an experiment currently with this pre-pro postbiotic kind of synergy, where I'm taking a supplement currently that's actually got certain prebiotics with apple pectin and things, and then probiotics that have things like Akkermansia, and that's going to actually help to nourish the terrain itself to create more urolithin A. And then I'm also getting urolithin A alongside that as well, all in one. So to sort of help my microbiome to be able to create some as well and really just nourish its ability there. I'm a fan of, I just seen in the chat, Timeline Nutrition. They have something called Mito Pure, and that's going to give you the real clinical dose, 500 milligrams of urolithin A. And the way they formulated it is already in its postbiotic form, right? So it's
Yeah.
something that you're able to take and get the benefits of regardless of your gut status. Unless you have serious gut dysbiosis, then I think all supplement efficacy can be lowered a little bit. Um, and the one that I'm using is from a company called Level Up Health, and it's urolithin A plus Akkermansia plus certain prebiotic fibers in there as well. And it's something that I do because, like I mentioned, I have a suboptimal SOD2 pathway. So I think that mitochondrial support is among my bigger priorities, and that's one of the things that I do among many, right? Sauna and exercise and cold exposure, all those kinds of things.
Yep. Perfect. Um, Donna's asking, can you please go over your biohacks? Mm, can you, Donna, do me a favor and please download the app and share that so that you can then from your phone listen to all of this all over again. I implore you and I thank you. But we talked about a lot. I mean, everything from NAD boosting to postbiotics you just heard us talk about to red light therapy and photobiomodulation to blood flow and blood flow restriction to heart rate variability to sauna and cold exposure. You just heard. So there's so many things we covered, and I can't remember them all. But I hope you download the app so that you can re-listen to some of this and share it. Thank you. And Nina's asking, could a slight stimulation of the innate immune system or macrophages encourage these macrophages to remove senescent cells? I love her line of thought. Yes, and why don't you give her sort of the basic of why?
Yeah, so definitely macrophages do clear the senescent cells, right? The problem is that as you age, that process happens less, and as you age, senescent cells tend to accumulate, right? It's a cumulative kind of effect, and like I mentioned earlier in the call, as they accumulate, they release certain pro-inflammatory compounds, right? So I would say that a little bit of support there is definitely in your interest. Um, I'm curious as to how you're stimulating the innate immune system, but what I would say is that anything that encourages that senolytic activity is definitely in your interest. And then as a downstream effect, yeah, I mean anything that helps to downgrade inflammation in the body because that's what the senescent cells are really causing, can also impact that pathway as well. Do you have any kind of specifics on that, Dr. Wild?
Yeah, in a clinical sense, I get very targeted about this. I will typically run what's called a cytokine stimulation panel. So I'll look at very specific cytokines and chemokines, things that are going to regulate up or down. There are pro and anti inflammatory cytokines that signal these particular white blood cells into action. By the way, if anyone tells you this, I don't know, these silly naysayers makes no sense. I could argue and win in a heartbeat to any immunologist or internist that there's no such thing as stimulating or boosting the immune system. It's what I've been doing for 25 years. It's so weird how they say that. Unless they're doing like a nomenclature play and somehow they're tricking with the wording. I don't know. But of course, you can boost the immune system. This is a specific way how. Macrophage, natural killer cells, half of the tools in the toolbox, if you will, of botanical medicine is to upregulate natural killer cell activity, right? Innate immunity. Anyway, to get very specific, I would look at blood work that would look at cytokine proliferation and stimulation using things like lipopolysaccharides to stimulate them in the lab and see what's working. And then immunomodulate. It gets dangerous when you overstimulate an immune system. You don't want to do that. And and how are you doing that? Because not every botanical ingredient or nutraceutical is right for everybody. That's why we DNA test and that's why we assess and address clinically. But I don't know. The simplest example I can give is natural killer cell upregulation from echinacea. I mean, that's one of the mechanisms of action. It tricks the immune system through these long chain polysaccharides, kind of long chain carbohydrate structures, into believing that what it's looking at is a foreign invader, like a virus, and it will upregulate natural killer cells, macrophages, so forth, to eat not senescent cells particularly, but eat rogue viruses and bacteria more efficiently. So of course you can boost your immune system. I digress. Nancy says, I did my test last March. Can I access my results also through the app? Oh, sorry, I missed one. Mary says, sorry if I missed this. I've done the 360. Do I need to retest in order to get the epigenetic test? It looks like I got it automatically added to my cart. Mary, good for you. Yes. So let me walk through this once again, real quick. Okay. You go to thednacompany.com, you go to testing, and the 360, our hero test, is going to decode your genes. Then you're going to get an instruction manual. What do you eat? What do you do? What do you take? How do you live? How do you exercise? Genes are one and done. DNA testing, you don't have to repeat that typically, unless we, of course, in the future iterations, which we probably will, add additional genes. Science changes, but genes don't. Your genes will always stay the same. This test, DNA aging, epigenetic test, this test here gives you your current biological age. I encourage everyone to know what they should be doing by testing their 360, understanding their DNA through all these different reports, understanding how they should behave and what they should take and do, etc. And then baselining that, we call this bookending. So, what you really ideally, you don't have to budget in doing this twice, but ideally, you really budget doing this twice. Why twice? First test is going to tell you maybe you're a 45-year-old living in a 55-year-old body. And the DNA 360 is going to inform what you can do to get yourself back to a 38-year-old living in a 45-year-old body. This is the coolest stuff. Then you stay doing that. And if you want to test a third time or even a fourth time, you continuously see that you're 6, 7, 8 years younger than your previous self. Adding years to your life. So good for you, Mary, for putting it into your shopping cart, checking out with that. Share the news with your friends and family. We love you for that. Rebecca's asking, some the previous something was about a 360 test before that. Oh, the app, something about the app. Did you see that question just flip through? So can she use her 360 test put into the app? Absolutely. That's why it was designed. Astaxanthin. That's a carotenoid, like zeaxanthin, astaxanthin. It's what makes flamingos pink. But and I love it, by the way, for the eyes. We forgot about lycopene, right, from tomatoes, zeaxanthin, astaxanthin, beta carotene, provitamin A, all these different things for the eyes. But astaxanthin's a great anti-ager, really across the board. I mean, for your skin too, right?
Yeah, well, and it's really like, everybody takes omega 3s, and you can actually get a pretty good dose of it if you go for krill oil specifically, right? And it's like an antioxidant that's found within the krill oil. I'm smirking a little bit because then the next question actually has to do with kidneys and what's a good quality supplement for that. And astaxanthin is actually a pretty useful one to go for as well, as far as the antioxidant capacity there. But I'm a fan of astaxanthin. I've been using it for quite some time, namely via krill oil supplementation. And I believe there's a little boost of it in Cardio Miracle that I know we're both a big fan of as well. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I think
One of,
most people would benefit.
one of my favorite mentioning krill, essential fatty acid formulations, which is actually directly manufactured. We don't manufacture an omega 3 at the DNA company, but there are a lot of them out there that are excellent. But my favorite for anti aging is actually called Bend Beauty. BEND, the formulator. Mark St. Onge has been in the industry forever. He created Ascenta, Nutricy, in fact, before it was sold to Nature's Way. And this is North American wide. Great quality product. It's formulated by DSM. Um, so whether it's a fish oil extract or it's actually algal oil, you can get both varieties. It's an excellent base product. But to the Bend product, they added azaxanthin and zeaxanthin and vitamin D. It's one of the best, highest quality, great tasting anti-aging serums on the market. And don't get sticker shock because when you see it at $80 a month, it delivers on promise. In fact, the way it's anti-aging, and there are studies done. He did studies specifically on this product. It's normally sold through spas and salons and so forth because that's where people are motivated. They want to see how this works, and it does. Is it has UV protective effects. It's like ingesting sun. You don't overly block the sun ever, but you ingest this stuff, and rather than blocking sun, it's going to protect your skin against the damage of UVA and UVB rays. Very cool stuff, proven. And yes, I think it's very important for kidneys, and I think kidneys are hardly ever spoken about. And chronic kidney disease. I mean, what are the points of genes that we test for in order to determine detoxification, glutathionization, and so forth? Is to be able to pee out, poo out, breathe out, and sweat out. But pee out is often forgotten about, and that's the kidney's job. And I think there's a few things that are not necessarily spoken about when it comes to kidney health. One of them is vitamin D. It's so important to the kidneys. And many people that have chronic kidney disease have low vitamin D. Easy to test for at home. And the dosages, are really reliant on what your blood levels currently say. That's a 25 OHD test. But the other one is, or two, is once again the combination that we like to use to support mitochondria: ubiquinol, coenzyme Q10, and PQQ. Because just like the brain and the heart and most other active organs that are always working, kind of never sleep, mitochondria are driving them. And mitochondria, this is the theory of aging around mitochondria, is when they slow down or don't become senescent, there's something called mitophagy, which is the same thing as autophagy, but for mitochondria. You want to kill off the dead and sluggish ones and bring in the new ones. But these ingredients can also help bring in the new ones, multiply these mitochondria, support their activity for downstream production of ATP, which is the currency of energy, help your kidneys work better. And then lastly, I would say alpha lipoic acid in an R plus, R minus combo isomer. That's what I've got. And that brings us to the end of the questions. Holy crap, we talked about a lot. Like tiring, but I hope we didn't age too quickly. I think part of it, it's interesting. One of the things that the centenarians do is constantly keep active in their brain cognition. Right, they're not really ever cognitively lazy. So that's another thing you can do to age slower when it comes to your brain. Interestingly enough, about the brain, this old thought that we don't manufacture new brain cells is out the window. We don't do it as frequently and vibrantly as we do until we're about 8 years old. But it's not one of those fatalistic scenarios where that's it. We don't make any more brain cells, and now we just kill them off. And exponentially, when we drink too much or expose ourselves to additional toxins, get hit in the head, etc. But the hippocampus, and this is why I'm full circle coming to this memory center, by actively engaging in podcasts, webinars, reading books, doing research, even things that are challenging, like testing your DNA and learning everything about yourself, is engaging your brain in a way that it will multiply. And BDNF, by the way, the gene you're talking about earlier, Justin, is like fertilizer to brain, to make new nerve fibers and connections, right? It's not just making new cells. It's supporting connections and also un or disconnecting, which is as important as reconnecting. So the brain's always active doing all these things, and BDNF is like sprinkling fertilizer to the soil to be able to do that better. And you want to be able to do that better if you have a poor variation in that BDNF. So that's a gene that you can discover. uh I don't know, man. What leave us off with, like, a biohack that you're itching to talk about that we didn't get a chance to talk about before we let this one be number whatever 100 is.
Yeah. Let me talk about a really interesting one is I think that part of the reason why people age at an accelerated rate is something that I call existential angst, right? Purposelessness. I think that if you wake up daily and you don't have a purpose and a reason to stick around, I don't think you're going to, right? So that connection to your why and that connection and that drive to keep on going and pressing forward, that'll press you forward and make you live longer in and of itself. So I think that I wouldn't necessarily call it a hack, but having a purpose, having a connection, and a reason to be here, that's going to make you go a lot longer than you would otherwise.
And what we talk about is the work that's been done on the blue zones and emphasized throughout, which is what the Japanese refer to in part anyways as ikigai, right? And sense of purpose all ties in. So I think that's excellent. And they all eat differently and healthy, and they all exercise, and they all have communal gatherings, and believe family and friends are of utmost importance. But the one thing that threads throughout, which is the most common denominator, is sense of purpose. If you could wake up in the morning and be able to tell yourself or somebody else the reason you're here today, your existential life existence, and just today, tomorrow, and even next week, if you know and have, certainty as to what that purpose is, you're living longer. Okay, longevity seekers, I think that's a wrap. But again, I want everyone to remember as we sign off here that aging isn't just something that happens to you. It's something that you're very much in control of, and you can track it. DNA 360 will identify where your resources are spent, time, energy, and financially. But the DNA aging test, methylation test, is going to tell you how young you are biologically. So that's how you biohack smarter, not harder. So whether it's optimizing your mitochondria or you're fine tuning your gut, as we talked about, or boosting your brain, think about it this way: your future self is calling on you right now to take action. Don't let it be I coulda, shoulda, woulda. And again, it's not just about living longer; it's about living stronger, sharper, more unstoppable, healthier. So take control, folks. Change the day you die. And we'll see you inside the app. Download the app. Go do it now. Send it to a friend. That app is tremendous what it's doing, and it's just going to get better every iteration. Justin, always a real pleasure, my friend.
Yes, sir. Today's actions determine tomorrow's reality. Remember that one too.
Love
Signing
it.
off.
All right, brother.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.